ya a Wilderness Khu.éex Khu.éex.
Khu.éex is, it's a very traditional song. It's well known in the Tlingit community, and it's one of those social gathering songs. How we selected those songs was Clarissa and Jean had spent some time in a theater troupe called Nakahiti, and they were based out of Juneau. They were very active in the late 80s and early 90s, and they toured up and down the West Coast, and so they were given a certain number of these traditional songs to perform in the theater troupe. And so I was asking them, what songs would you see it, befitting for us to use? And Khu.éex was one. It's basically a song that is kind of like, again, kind of singing in a round and calling out the different clans that might be present in a ceremony. And so it's something for everybody to join in and participate with. And then when your clan is called up, then then you get more animated, and you're kind of standing up front, and it's just a big social dance, really. And so by doing it the way that we did was obviously very different than the way that it sounds traditionally.
Khu.éex Khu.éex Stakat you on Khu.éex Khu.éex.
In fact, we've done some like Huna Exit is one in particular that's a pretty well-known song, but it's also I think it's a Deshitan entrance song or exit song. It's used in both ways, but it's kind of like a one of the bigger sort of well-known and crowd pleaser songs that are sung in a traditional potlatch or a Khu.éex. It's sort of one that almost every Tlingit person knows that melody and that song. So we did get permission to perform that one by the clan group, and but I think too there was because we turned it into a bit of a drone, and really heavy with heavy guitar feedback, and just really just that energy that with the beat behind it. It was I don't know that it's I think some people were maybe taken by surprise, and maybe not in a good way, because they didn't know, never heard anything like it, But again, it's sort of like Jimi Hendrix playing the national anthem, It kind of feels like, it's beautiful.
Got a grant where we would sit, and we were paid to sit with elders and just listen to them tell stories, and sit with them and eat with them, spend a large amount of time with them, travel with them, as they mentored us, so that's, and education that there's no way, no Western school setting or anything can like duplicate, no way. And so I was like really just grateful and fortunate to have done that, and learning how to listen. I'm still learning, and still, and my whole thing too is like, how can I pass that on? How can I pass that on? The listening and the tapping into it, and of whatever that is, because we all have that. Not only if you're native, but human beings. There's a vibration on the earth that holds that listening, holds that vibration. Conversations with Clarissa was about dreams. We'd always Clarissa and I would just pop into just like these deep conversations, like, hey, it's good to see you, right on. Hey, I had this dream. Hey, let me tell you about this dream I had. And then she'd just go into it and describe it. The images that she saw, she would start describing it. And if you see those old elder storytellers, they'd speak to you, but they're speaking, they're not hearing the words. They'll close their eyes. What they're doing is they're seeing the images. And how are they going to describe the images? How are they going to describe that? That's like Bernie would tap in and grab, just those sounds and those rhythms, that were out there, that the average person, the rhythms that were out there, that just they couldn't hear. But there's people who tap into that.
Tangi Yan Shutan Itundatani Tlek Na Uhan Yehayati Hashuka Hus Ha'id Idashi Chagu Yach Uhan Yeyati Hashaganya Hus Ha'inch Inasti Yadu Uhan Wehakusti Yadu Uhan Wehakusti Hashaganya Hus Ha'inch Inasti Chagu Yach Uhan Yeyati Hashuka Hus Ha'id Idashi Tlek Na Uhan Yehayati Yanshutan Itundatani Latin I Yuchatangi Hathith Hus Dujineyi.
So that song, the bass line started. But Preston had the skeleton through a bass line. And it was like a Curtis Mayfield kind of vibe at first.
Called it the placeholder was called Plinkett Mayfield. that was the it was like the constant like rim tap, on there, and it And it is based on a Clan song. It was a song that Clarissa brought, and she reinterpreted it. So she stretched out the vocals, and so I gave her the bass line, and then she added the vocals over the top of it. So then that's what became the basis of like what we tried to do in the studio. And that was, and then again, it just the way the drums gave it that feel. I think it just kind of naturally shifted into that, and so Rio de Juno became like, well, that sounds, it's kind of humorous in a way, and so that's why we called it that one. But that it was just kind of like a little scratch idea that turned into a piece. Going North. Yeah, that was a song that was the very first thing that we recorded when we, walked into the studio. There's a riff that was based on Gene's singing, and I just kind of came up with a chord progression that went under it, and so there was very little discussion. We just walked right in and started playing it, and it came out, the way it did. I thought it was a really good sort of jump-off point for the sound that we were trying to create. So playing it back was really interesting because Clarissa Rizol was, she was the other singer that we were working with, one of the co-founders of the group, and she was, hadn't really recorded this kind of music before, and the way that she felt the drums like really pumped up loud in the mixing booth, and it just hits you right in the chest, and she was just like, oh my God, this is really powerful. Named the first album "The Wilderness Within" because when we in reference to that first track, she felt like this was an awakening and a new way of presenting a traditional song, and that the power behind it, what she was feeling was something that was awakening the wilderness within, and so that's what we called the first album.
Yeah, we didn't we didn't rehearse any of it. Remember, I had the guitar part for it, and just played that, and everybody else fell in, and we didn't know what Clarissa was gonna do.
Say you were to come back, knocking at her painted door, a design you know is coho. She would welcome you into her large, dark one-room lodge, lit by a couple of kerosene wall lamps from L.L. Bean, where at first you did not notice the smoke from the fire in the center of the room, trailing up to the smoke hole above, where White Raven tried to fly out, but got stuck and became blackened forever.
I think she said, I'm going to do something on this. And you're like, all right, yeah. If Clarissa says she wants to do a piece on it, you let Clarissa do a piece on it.
Right.
But yeah, and she just, I remember playing that. And I think we only did one take of it because just the energy of the piece, that story that she was telling was like, wow. Like, we can't do a second take on that one and have it come out with that energy again, because it's like some things, they only happen once and they never happen again. And if we were to try to do another take on that, it wouldn't have had the chills that you get the first time you're hearing those words. And we didn't know the story that she was going to tell. So everything was reacting like in real time. And that was one of the cool things about Bernie with the spoken word pieces. And again, he hadn't heard them before we did it then and there, and his piece would react to the dynamics of the story and the words that were being said, and you can hear kind of like not quite like a
call and response,
kind of like call and response, but without the call, just like he's hearing something and he's
reacting.
Whereas most people would have a reaction through thoughts in their head, like you got to hear what was going on in Bernie's head in reaction to what was being said coming out through his fingers on the keyboard.
Yeah, that was and it was interesting because that particular piece, the tonality of the chords that you came up with was a perfect cadence for the style of the spoken word piece, because it was kind of eerie and it was kind of had like the idea that it was in this clan house that had not a lot of natural light coming into it, and you could almost kind of it evoked so much around that, and the way that they reacted to each other, and sometimes her cadence would get kind of amped up, and then everybody would be reacting to what she was doing, and those pieces are really, really fascinating to me.
You did not notice the carved alderwood mask smiling with one gold tooth, flickering by candlelight, propped next to the cedar bark basket, on that driftwood shelf to your right. And in its shadow below, the carved bentwood boxes that held the clan's button dance blankets, each made of wool bought from the House of Fabrics, with 2,000 mother-of-pearl buttons on each of them from Winona's, and 600 turquoise beads barked from the stateside Indians who sat in the sun she hardly ever got. And what about the sealskin boots parked next to your feet, and sealskin coat embellished with brass beads, feathers, and leather fringe, and the sealskin and wolf fur hat and matching mittens hanging on the brass hooks screwed into the cedar planked wall? Did you smell cedar when you walked in? And did you see the soapstone puffin bird carved by your great-grandson when he was 9? And the small bentwood box that used to be yours, now stuffed with glass beads for the beading projects of your great-granddaughter?
I think sometimes Clarissa doesn't get, like, if we have people outside the group covering the group, Bernie's like the touch point, but Clarissa was as important within the group. Plus, she was as important to, like the weaving work that she did, for example, as Bernie was to the innovations and the synthesizer stuff that he did. And that it's, there's such parallels in, being the masters in their field.
Well, they're both masters in their craft and who they were, absolutely. And not only, and being a master in your craft, I mean, you don't see the world like this with blinders on. You see the world totally with those blinders off, and what we look at the world with owl eyes. And even when you look at the world with owl eyes, owl, most native peoples, you're stepping into that spiritual realm too. And they're both so much and very open with acknowledging and talking about that as well. And both Bernie and Clarissa, even if you didn't know who they were, that they were masters at their crafts, there's those individuals that can walk into a room and change the space with their presence. And both of them were that way.
How about that chilkat dance blanket hanging on the loom over there in the corner, away from the mud, away from the ashes and crumbs? The only weaving in the world where you can weave the perfect circle, therefore perfect for your style of design. And she learned it, the weaving, from Jenny 2 months before she died, last of the traditional weavers. And they say it takes at least a year to weave a robe, but how would you know? You didn't know how to weave, or did you? Through clan inheritance, only a select few knew when you were around. And it was almost a dying art, they say, except for the ones outside of tribal customs who quickly learned what they could, weaving together bits of the dangling knowledge. And she was one to help weave pieces of the heritage back so she could earn prestige, recognition, and $40,000 a robe, so she could buy pretty clothes, new shoes, new dishes, towels, laptop, stereo, sewing machine, lawnmower, Vitamix, and iPhone, so she could buy a piece of land where her ancestors once fished, to build her cedar home, and to buy a Toyota truck to haul all of her new possessions and firewood in. And then bury a septic tank for a flushing commode and install a generator for it all to be in, and buy the new flat screen TV sitting on the oak cabinet beside the stack of American Indian art books and magazines, surrounded by masks, looms, boxes, skins, beads, and stones, surrounded by what she strives to make as art, what the art can sell for, what the money she makes from selling the art can buy, what the buying of anything she desires she has discovered, has eventually sold pieces of her soul, where the selling of her soul has left but a faint light in her life. Say you were to come back, knocking at her painted door. You would not even notice the dim world behind her, full of smoky objects casting shadows, drifting upwards through a blackened hole. You would look into her eyes only, and know that the faint light had held on for you. And the next time you were ready, you would take her with you when you went.
And I think, one really cool example of storytelling and poetry, like in regards to the song Angry Bear, which is one that I like to hold that up as an example, kind of a hybrid of styles that I really, really love in the group. In fact, that riff, Rob came up with that riff, and that became almost like the standard in my mind of the kind of groove and style that I just really admire. And it's got I call it sort of beat poetry, because Gene is such a great storyteller. I mean, that's really one of his things that he's really focused on. And so he does take that storytelling into new realms, into new ways, more contemporary ways, and talking about contemporary themes and issues, in the context of the story.
Walking down the street just the other day, Brother Raven was coming my way. So I said, hey, Brother Raven, you got some time? I'd like to ask some questions, like to pick your mind. He said, come on, son, let's go for a walk to the coffee shop up the block. Now that's where we can talk, yeah. That's with Raven, Brother Raven, he's alive. So you freed the stars, the moon, the sun. You brought the daylight to everyone. What's the answer to it all? He said it's for the people, man. That's where it's at. Working for the people. That's where it's at. Working for the people.
How Angry Bear came out was it's actually lyrics from another song that I wrote, and I just started just tossing them. We were in the studio, and I just started tossing them on there, and just seeing if it would fit. And sure enough, it did at the time. And so many of our songs, that's how it started. It just started off with a jam, or maybe sometimes Rob would come in and say, "Hey, I got this here rhythm right here. You know, might try. It's kind of cool. Might just try it out and then just see where it goes." And that's often the question of Preston or Rob. He'd come in with the rhythm too, and he'd just go, "Hey, what do you got for this?" And sometimes I have no idea. And it's like, let's see what happens. And I originally wrote that song being up here in Southeast Alaska, being of the Raven clan, and the Raven being the trickster of the Tlingit, and so many other places as well.
We brought the spirit to the man from the fire from our motherland. He got some help from Brother Huck, and when he hit the scene, man, he pumped it up. In his beak he held that flame, and it burned his face, but in his pain, he brought that spirit to the man. That's what we're talking about here, bringing that spirit to the people. Raven took that spirit and he threw it into the rocks. He threw it into the trees, into the mountains, into the water. He took that spirit and he threw it into all the animals. He took that spirit and he threw it into the human beings. And now we all hold that spirit, but more. And that's what upheld by our ancestors. That spirit of creator.
That the riff is really, comes, that melody that the riff is in is like Khu.éex style. That's Northern Plains style melody put into a guitar riff. And I think even though I love prog rock, and I get my King Crimson on and my Zappa on, and I like music that's intentionally in non 4/4 time signatures, but traditionally a lot of native music is not in like a 4/4, like a tidy seamless end of like 4/4 time signatures. It's like in a lot of native music, the meter follows the melody. The melody does not follow the meter. So, if you were to transcribe a lot of like powwow music, it wouldn't be in like a series, the steady series of 4/4s. It's just the meter is as long, the melody goes, maybe there's a beat or two of a rest, and then, the next melodic segment starts. So we have a lot of music that falls outside of 4/4, but it's not really intentionally trying to be proggy or anything like that. Or it's just like, no, this is traditional style music that's integrated into this other style, and the meter follows the melody. So the riff, like in Angry Bear, it's in 10/4 because that's how the melody falls.
I love everything about that song, Angry Bear, because it's got like, and it's one of the, thinking of the performances of the different, musicians, like Stanton Moore, he plays incredibly on that particular track. I mean, he was unflappable because it was, a different time signature, but he just pushed it into a new realm, and some of like, even like as the crescendo of the song, as we're, finishing it up, and some of the drum rolls are like super incredible. I mean, I think I listen for them every time. It's like, because there's something that I think is so special about, what he brought to the group, and that song in particular. It's very, very cool.
So I remember Stanton, he came in with a bunch of those 6-hour energy caffeine drinks. Came in, sound checked the drums, took some of like the caffeine juice, and that's probably why some of the drum fills on that song are so bonkers, because it's like, yeah, Stanton just got his caffeine boost over there. That was the first one we did in the studio, like the first session I went to. That was the first song of the session. That was the first thing we did. So Preston brought me in. So I grew up, I was born and raised in Seattle, grew up in the Seattle area. And so Indian country, as big as it is still really small in a lot of ways. So I went to college at Evergreen, and the Longhouse director there is Tina Kukon, who's a mutual friend of Preston and I's. And when I moved back to Washington, years back, I was like, hey, I'm trying to find, some other musicians to play with, other native musicians to play with. And she's like, oh, I should introduce you to Preston, because he's doing funk and you're like a hardcore funk guy, and I should put you guys in contact with each other. And turned out Preston knew this band Red Earth that I played in back in Albuquerque, and he was familiar with that group. So that was kind of like, oh yeah, that's me from that. Tina says we should meet up, and we started talking. And at that point then Preston was doing a little big band project, and I was kind of putting out, I guess what you would call underground stuff, not on label. Right. I was throwing demos around, and he heard some of my stuff, and he was like, oh yeah, you play keyboard too, do you have any ideas for keyboard stuff for this little big band album? So then I started overdubbing keyboards on that, even though we hadn't met in person. Basically, he came through Bellingham one day and just handed over the hard drive. And he was like, okay, just take that to the studio and throw some stuff on there.
It was really, it was kind of funny, because when I drove up to Bellingham, and he said, yeah, meet me here on this corner. And I was like this sort of, almost clandestine meeting. It was like, okay, well, have fun with it. When it came down to the Khu.éex sessions, the first one, I did go in, just really bare bones, and Rob was like, hey, how did that session go? It's like, if you need any help. And I was like, yeah, I know everybody, it's like, but what the hell? I said, I'm sure. So then I said, well, we're gonna go in for session 2. We're gonna try this. So let's do, let's put our heads together and kick some ideas back and forth. So we were doing like, I'm pretty sure it was like cell phone, like, playing. I think you're playing like, you're not even plugged into an amplifier. You're playing like, your guitar in your bathroom or something.
There's one part, I didn't have like a computer recording rig that was working. So at one point, I was doing like making drum programming in Ableton, coming out of a computer speaker in the bathroom, while I had like the mini amp just close enough to pick up on the cell phone. So that was like res recording classic right there, like the bathroom recording with
Yeah.
Involving a computer, a cell phone, a guitar amp, and a plastic tub upside down with everything sitting on it. That one started as a guitar part. I think that was one of like the bathroom scratch tracks. And yeah, that was just a skeleton of like a Gary Scheider kind of Glenn Goins kind of guitar line, and Press came up with the bass part, and the studio just be like, all right, what's the next idea somebody has? And we just played that, and then then it just Stanton just played and Bernie just played, and that was another one where Bernie was all over the place, where he was on clavinet and dropped a synth bass thing. That one was cool because there's like dueling bass, because there's like you had like that distorted, like monstrous heavy bass tone, and then Bernie was playing like the synth bass along with it. If you have two bass lines going at the same time, it can get like really murky and muddy and not come out sounding good. But that was one of the genius of Bernie, that he could play a synth bass part on top of a bass, like a string bass, play it just close enough but also different enough that somehow it works, it fills space, but it doesn't like clash or come out just like a blurred mess. And I think the title, No More, like we didn't have a song for it. It's just, it sounded like a longhouse just getting hit with the tsunami wave and no more planks. It's like the ocean just took out a house. So
yeah, that's one of my favorite tracks, you know, even when we play it live too, because it's kind of like our Flashlight riff. I'll never forget like a live gig when I was standing up on stage and I'm playing Flashlight with Bernie Worrell on stage, and it was just like, oh my god, it's like it was one of those deja vu moments, like where you're just like out of body experience.
Funny story. So like T-Funk, when we tracked it was way longer. It got truncated down, but there was one part where, you know, there was 2 organ solos that Bernie did at the end, and I went home with the recording and I learned, like, transcribe Bernie's organ solos, like note for note. I'd be like, I'm gonna do some fusion stuff and just double the organ solos with the guitar solo where it's doing like note for note. It's gonna sound badass. And then you get there on overdub day, and the solo part that you were gonna double has been deleted out of the arrangement after you spent like a couple hours, you know. Bernie organ solos are not easy stuff to transcribe, so I'm like, oh, man. But it was a good learning opportunity, you know. It's like I learned a lot transcribing those organ solos, but Yeah, but again, you just exhale and all right, it wasn't meant to be.
I will have to say this, and I think I already told you that, Skerik was, unsure, about bringing, anybody else in.
It's got to be people that can play anything, especially the drummers. They have to be able to play anything, and at any time, stuff's going to come up really fast, and you just have to be really good listeners and just not have any technical limitations. Everyone in the room, whether it's engineers or assistants or musicians, everyone is contributing to the feeling of the music. So everyone in the room we gotta all be on the same page.
We started playing, and then it just clicked, and I think it was all, it was all good. But having not met him before, he was a little trepidatious because but in the end it all worked out, obviously, really, really well, and because of the styles of music that we wanted to bring out. And so Rob had a lot of scratch ideas, and oftentimes he'll have a main riff or something, and I'll listen to it, and I'll come up with a beat part, or a chorus or whatever, and then sometimes I'll have a main riff, and then he'll add to that, and so we just kick ideas back and forth, and that's how a lot of this stuff comes together. Dog Bass was, again, just a riff that we started jamming on. I mean, at the time, for me, going into the studio with Stanton Moore and Bernie and Skerik, Skerik and I were buddies, and it's been a long time since I was a full-time everyday bass player, and so I sometimes feel kind of, especially at that time, I felt kind of limited, in my ability, and there was a riff that I'd kind of jammed on or jammed with. The different layering that we did with the keyboards, multiple keyboard tracks, just gave this really cool vibe.
Rob and Preston do a lot of the writing, and when all the basics are recorded, basic tracks, basically I'll just go in there with Randall, and no one else will be around in the studio, really. Maybe the two of us, or maybe there'll be another horn player like Hans Quaver or whoever's needed. and I'll just go and start writing all the horn parts on top of it. So following what has been improvised in the bed or composed in the foundation of the song. It's really cool to have those moments. And it's just Randall and I just in the salt mines, you just for like hours, just like, okay, let me overdub another section. Let me overdub this part. So you kind of get into this rhythm.
And then, there's that one in particular it's got such a climax to it that it's really, again, just working with the energy and having Stanton Moore, when I'm just not much of a bass player, but having Stanton Moore, kick you into high gear with his he really can kind of drive the energy of a jam. Bernie there, like reacting to what Stanton's doing, and I'm just kind of like hanging on for dear life, really, and so that was a very organic thing that just was a jam. Again, not knowing what we were going to do to it. We didn't end up adding any vocals to that particular song, but and then Rob came in retroactively and played the entire composition as an overdub, and it felt like you're there the whole time, Synergy. I mean, I think you said that was a tricky one.
That was a hard one, man. The guitar part was, it's not a very complex one, but it's just like did it.
Randall Dunn's participation in this creative process as well, because he always had the idea of like, a different sound. Like he would say, okay, Bernie, hey, how about organ on this one, or how about Rhodes on this, or whatever it was going to be, and then he would or like a Moog line, solo, or whatever it was going to be. So he was also a big part of that layering, and I think that sometimes we had so many layers. We had the ability to pick and choose like the different things to highlight to accentuate the music.
I always try to include Randall whenever there's group music being made that is its primary source is improvisation. Randall is a really great vibe in that scene.
You know, he was kind of arranging stuff without really knowing, but I think he was, in his mind, he had sort of a place saver. It's like, okay, that's where the horns are going to come.
So Randall is really well-known producer. He's best known for his work with Sun and with Earth. So he produced like Sun's Monoliths and Dimensions, which is in a lot of ways viewed as like their definitive opus. You know, with Earth, you know, they were already kind of a legendary band by the time he started working with them. He kind of got in kind of after they'd gone on hiatus and kind of resumed, and you know, he produced like their Hex record and the Bees Made Honey and the Lion's Skull, which are kind of more fall within, I guess we would call like heavy drone music, but his scope definitely goes a lot further than that, because so he knew Skerik because he, you know, done production work with Skerik, like on Garage à Trois, like he's done like Avid King albums, Critters Buggin'. He's pretty, yeah. I mean, he's just like, he's a great sonic sculptor with sound, and he's also a good guider on, you know, projects as they're happening. So a lot of people will like record albums and then go to him to mix them, but it's like when he's doing the production and engineering at the beginning stage, it definitely has a different quality to it. In a lot of ways, he kind of has a cinematic, I guess, element to the way he sculpts sound and kind of guides people through the creative process, which I think is kind of fostered where a lot of our albums have like a cinematic element to them, where it kind of feels like an analogy to, you know, being like a director and a cinematographer, whereas like the musicians are kind of the actors and the screenwriters, I guess. But yeah, I think when the more we go into it, the more I think we've looked at it like, yeah, these are like movies in sound. You know, they're kind of fall into being concept records in a lot of ways, but I think we've definitely wanted to have like an arc similar to like if you're watching a movie, and I think that's with my approach to things, I've kind of gone more in that direction, just because I find it like an interesting way to approach music making, and you know, looking at like what people like George A. Romero and like Lucio Fulci and Dario Argento, and you know, how can you apply that screenwriting stuff and like that approach to making a movie? How can you carry that over to like making a record?
Bernie would tap in and grab, just those sounds and those rhythms, that were out there, that the average person, the rhythms that were out there, that just they couldn't hear. But there's people who tap into that, like people who, I was watching this documentary on an individual who's blind, and how he sees the sounds. He sees the sounds. He can't see with his vision, but he sees the sounds, and there's such a, and it just blew me away when he was describing, as the sounds and those that's out there, that is present, but we walk in the world like this so many times with these blinders on, and Clarissa and Bernie, they walked with the blinders off. They saw the world with our eyes.
So Surpassed is another one of those songs where the time signature is following the melody. So that actually alternates between being in 12/8 and I think being in 13/8. But it doesn't sound like it's in a weird signature, just because, again, it's following what the melody does. So I came up with that one and brought it in that first session I was at. And it ended up sounding like way different after everything else got added onto it. And it was really, what I love about it is, it did come out kind of proggy, where, it sounds, with the, Keith Emerson is one of Bernie's favorite synth players. And, after we tracked it, it was like he was playing Rhodes on it, but Randall had him go out and do like a Moog overdub on top of it. And then that just took it up to like Emerson, Lake and Palmer vibe. And yeah, Bernie's synth playing on that. I remember everyone was just kind of up against the glass, because we all played together in the room, and then he went into overdub by himself. And so we're all like in the listening room, and just everyone against the glass, just like watching him go off and just coax all these insane sounds. And it was like, wow. Yeah.
So subsequently that song has kind of become a bit of a, Gene calls it a prayer song. It's like Surpassed. It's like one song that, when we performed it at the record release, we had like kind of a photo montage of Bernie, and we brought, his, leather fringed jacket and kind of smudged it, and, did this whole ceremony around it. And it was it's kind of almost become like become like that. Yeah, that's how we feel about that particular song when we perform it live.
One performance we had for Bernie, and remembrance for Bernie, something like that was a total spiritual experience. And I know for the band it was, for Khu.éex it was, and we just brought everyone along with us.